This week I finished the fieldwork for my PhD, and as I was leaving, somebody said to me, "Is that it now, Joe? Do you is the next thing that you sit the big exam?" I was like, "No, now it's data analysis." And then my dad said to me, he said, "What is the theory you've been testing?" I mean, I was like, "What theory, Dad?" He's like, "Well, you must have had a hypothesis that you're testing. Like, how will you find out if what you thought was right or not?" And I'm like, "No, no, I don't have a hypothesis. There's not a sort of, I didn't set out with a target of a thing to find. Like, I'm not checking whether apples fall down or things get faster if they move along slippery surfaces. I'm exploring meaning in a kind of not countable way." And then last night I was having a cup of tea with Dr. Jill Goodwin, and she said, "So what's your approach to data analysis, Joe?" And all of these questions point in a similar direction. And then I was also reading tips about how to do your Viva, and they said you should practice summarising the key things that you're thinking, or summarising your key points, or putting things in a nutshell, basically. And so you are my practice. So I thought I would try and explain data analysis. So you can't see, but I can see. I hope you can't see. I don't think there's anything, if you did see it, that you're not allowed to see. It just might be a bit personal to me. So what I have is this, right, even if I want you to see, you can't see. So I have a folder with lots of folders in. The first folder in here is my raw data. So every time I've been in the field, I always think makes it sound like I'm in the army or something, like a field of battle, or a farmer in the field. I don't really think of it as a field. Well, I do, but it's not a field. It's a building with people with profound intellectual and multiple disabilities in, and I go in and I get to spend time with these people and do work with these people. And every time I do that, afterwards I write up what happened. It's a bit like keeping a diary, and my process of writing that up has been part of my data collection process. And as an autistic person, I've had to adapt that so that I can do it effectively. Initially, as I came out of the field, I would find that I hadn't processed all the information yet. So if I sort of came out and tried to write it down straight away, I couldn't do it. I used to literally have to go and walk around supermarkets. That's my method in my data collection process, is I would just go and walk around supermarkets, because for me, and this is very much not all autistic people, there's something about the homogenized nature of that environment, just the sort of blandness of it, that works like a buffer. When you see that little circle on it's like buffering. I just wander around a supermarket, I don't buy anything until I've buffered, and then I can go, like, this is what just happened, and write it all down. So you write rich descriptive text about what happened. The more time I've spent in the field, the shorter my buffering has become, to the point where I was able to walk out of the field environment, sit straight down and type it all up. So what I have in my raw data folder is just like an enormous diary entry of everything that happened. And then in between visits, I would write reflective notes, they're called memoing, about those experiences. Because imagine if you wrote down everything that happened to you today, and then you thought about it again tomorrow, you'd realise, oh, hang on a minute, that was connected to that, and I forgot to say this, and there's all that other stuff that's meaning that you experienced that you didn't get down the first time. That's all in my memos, and that's all in my raw data. So then I've taken my raw data, and after that experience of being in the field, and I have 3 stages of that data. So there's my initial bit of being in the field, and my middle bit of being in the field, and my latter bit of being in the field. They're all kind of slightly different. After my first big chunk of being in the field, there were things that I felt I knew. Like, this is what I've learned through this experience. And obviously you learn it through living it. You acquire that understanding through living it. That you wrote it down as well. It's a bit like when you're asked to write your evaluation of a lesson as a teacher. Like, you know whether it went well or not before you write that evaluation down. There's stuff that you know because you've lived that experience. So there were a few things I really felt like I knew. And so what I did was I created codes, which makes it sound like detective work, and it's not. It's just literally like tags. Like this, I knew that my being autistic had affected my fieldwork process. I knew that the idea of intention, which is something I take from Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, was really significant in what I was doing. And there was a couple of other things as well. So I got my codes, which was A for autism, I for intention. It's nothing technical. And then I think, I feel like I know this stuff. And you look back through the data. So you read back through all these like diary entry type things and you go, yeah, that's where I knew it from. That experience, that moment, and you spot it. And as I spot it, I tag it with those codes. So I've gone through the stage 1 data and tagged with those first 4 codes. And then as I was doing that, obviously you're reading through that data again, there's other things that emerge as significant. So there was another 3 codes that emerged through that process. And then I took those codes forwards to the stage 2 data, and I've gone through the stage 2 data and tagged with those codes. And some of the emergent codes dropped off and some new ones came in, and then I've repeated the process for stage 3. So by the time I've coded all of the data, I have some key codes that run through all of it, and then some that sort of pop in and out and mix. And then I do a bit of tidying up where you think, actually, so there was a thing about things that blocked what I was doing is an interesting thing to look at. I was looking at doing research with people with profound intellectual and multiple disabilities, and there were certain things that happened in the environment or certain things that happened to me that stopped me from doing that. And one of the things that was significant, I picked up as a little subcode early on, and then later you realise, no, this is part of this bigger picture of things that are getting in the way. So that little subcode got adapted. Nothing fancy. The subcode used to be F, and then I turned it to O because it was actually part of the obstruction of the process or the overwhelm of the process. So things that had previously been coded F, I switched around and coded O. Then I have these 3 big chunks of data coded accordingly. And what I did next was I took out anywhere where I've got the code O, for example, I just copied and pasted that bit of text into another document. So I end up with a document that is all my O code text. And then I looked through that document, what I did, and actually this is silly, but if you're doing this sort of thing, this kind of practical how you do it stuff is useful. I put those paragraphs into a table, and then I created an extra column. And I went through and I just wrote down in that extra column what was happening in that paragraph. So you have a whole paragraph that I've talked about as something that's obstructing my ability to do the work. And you just look at the paragraph and go, okay, what's going on there? And you're worried about what you look like to other people. You're worried about how you appear, or you're worried about the social situation, or they've been given a task to do that is not a task that they can do at the same time as doing work with you, that kind of thing. And so you tag it all through and you end up with themes that go with those original codes. So I can show, I wonder if I could. I probably can't because of the way that things show up. But I have these lovely pictures. Can you see? Yeah, you can sort of see. So these are the main codes from the stage 1 data analysis. And then you see those little things sort of radiating off after them. They're the sub-themes that emerge. So I can talk in more detail about how those things were experienced in the field because I've done this analysis. And I've done that for all 3 stages of the data. And then I will do it overall for all of the data merged together. But then there's a thing about going deep into your data, because this isn't data, like my dad's question, what are you going to prove? What are you going to show? This isn't that sort of thing. I'm not looking to come out of this going, I know a thing, or I have demonstrated a theory. I'm looking to come out of this with an understanding of what was experienced and what was felt, because that's where the meaning was in this work. And I'm not really expecting to know anything. There's a thing that they tell you when you start your PhD. They say you have to push forth the boundaries of knowledge. You have to In order to be awarded a doctorate, you have to know something that nobody else has known before. You have to, create this new knowledge. And hopefully I'll get away with it, but I'm not expecting to know anything new. I'm expecting to be able to, or I'm hoping to be able to articulate an experience lived, and for that to be a meaningful experience, and for the meaning in that articulation to have value to other people. But I'm not really claiming any newness. And happily there are other, writers that will tell you that there's nothing new under the sun. And so the idea that you could do a PhD by pushing forth the boundaries of knowledge is a debatable one. But I have these codes, I have these themes, I have this kind of overview of the data. And what I want now is more than that. And they say it's good to go deep into your data. And as an autistic person who enjoys, monotropic focus on things, it's such a fantastic invitation. And so what I've begun to do now is to write into the data and to try and tell the stories that I find in it. And I'm telling them over and over again, because, I don't know if you've ever had this experience when somebody says, oh, how did you do that? Or what did you do? Or, like when Jill asked me, how are you doing your coding, Joe? You go, oh, well, I'm doing it like this. And as you explain it, you find something in that explanation that you didn't realise you knew. You're like, oh, I knew there was a reason I was doing that, and I just explained it to you, and I hadn't realised that was why. But that's totally, like, you hear it yourself. Yeah, that's totally why I'm doing it. And so I'm telling the stories over and over again and writing those stories over and over again. And the other thing about my data is that there's things that were really, really relevant that aren't captured in the original raw data because I didn't realise how relevant they would be. I wrote about what happened in the field, but I was in the field. And so actually the whole of myself and all of my life outside of the field is also brought into the field. And there's things that have happened to me over the past few months that have been incredibly impactful in terms of what happened in the field. And the fieldwork doesn't make sense unless you also articulate those things. So I'm going through and finding the missing stories and telling and retelling. And I hope, because I haven't finished doing this yet, and there might be more to do, I'm sure there will be more to do at the end of it, but I hope what I'll see in writing into the data is initially a kind of patchy understanding that coalesces over time with articulation into like here's the bit of meaning that I encountered, and like maybe that's useful to you. So yeah, hopefully that's my data analysis process. Watch this space, and maybe at some point in the future there'll be a thesis that articulates it better. This is like attempt 1 at articulating it. So maybe this is a horrifically long video for social media. Maybe in attempt 2 or 3 I'll be able to say it in a 2-minute nutshell. But yeah, that is what it is for now.